Good evening. Good evening, good evening. Giving Andrew a minute to join here. Good evening. Where are you guys calling in from tonight? Just drop it in the comments below while we're waiting for Kimber and Andrew to log on and join us. Good evening. As Kimber Red is unable to join. Somebody's in New York, somebody's still in St. Louis, Decatur. Welcome. There we go.
Hey.
Hello, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, you figured it out. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've never actually, chatted with you live. So this is Andrew from Gimber Red. So welcome to the Dr. Twyman show on Monday nights. Tonight we're just going to chat about photobiomodulation. Some people have just questions. What is it? And Andrew's definitely an expert in photobiomodulation, especially on the dosing side of things. So Andrew, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm an engineer by training. Got a bachelor's in chemical engineering, and went into working in a couple different industries like fuel cells and specialty chemicals and 3D printing, high temperature polymers, and a bunch of different industries that we're primarily focused on kind of being specialty materials and chemicals. And along the way I started working on my health, and I started trying some biohacking stuff, and kind of learned about red light therapy, and started trying it out. Started with a heat lamp for some lower back pain, and kind of just spiraled from there, using blue blockers, using red lights at night, and then kind of realized there's a bunch of problems with the red light therapy industry, that I wanted a good high quality device. I wanted something that was third party tested and measured properly, and something that wasn't necessarily price gouged. I started Gimber Red just over 4 years now, and so I was kind of almost one of the earliest red light panel companies on the market. And, I'd like to think I pioneered a few things like, being very transparent, getting third-party testing for intensity and things like that, getting our panels very low EMF and low flicker. And so, and then I kind of, as my engineering background and research background, diving into a lot of the research, and there's tons and tons of interesting research on PubMed. And a lot of it's free. You can just read yourself, and your followers can read. So there's really no stopping anyone from becoming an expert themselves. And then I try to disseminate what I learn onto, blogs and podcasts and Instagram posts, and try, kind of share what I learn, and try to, unfortunately, what I learn ends up kind of debunking a lot of what marketing claims have been in the past. I kind of ended up being more of a going against the grain type of individual in this market. So that's kind of the quick rundown. Maybe I can talk about specific products later on or whatever.
Sure. No, and definitely, you're definitely one of the people that stands out, on your transparency. I mean, your website is just a wealth of knowledge. I go to it routinely to look at your new blogs, and he posts frequently about how do you actually accurately measure these devices, because definitely that's probably one of the besides how to dose it, which we'll probably get into, but the other big question is how do you pick out a quality panel? I mean, there's just so much information, right, so much marketing out there, and that's why I tell patients that you just can't go to Amazon site, red light panel, expect for the best. I mean, you have to really kind of know
Right.
a lot of parameters, and it's not that complicated, but you do need a little bit of homework. And Andrew's blog is excellent, kind of laying out the different parameters you should really be looking for. So I do definitely applaud him. But he's very transparent. His device will tell you exact wavelengths and power and irradiance and all these big physics words, which they're important. But if they spell it out on the website, you should be able to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. It shouldn't be, I try to make it readable to the layman, even though I know you can kind of lose people. One of the big things is we talk about is intensity, and that's the usually in the units are milliwatts per centimeter squared. So a milliwatt is a unit of power. So think about your watts that you consume and that you pay your electric bill for. It's the same kind of watts. It's a universal thing. You can use this unit of power, this watt, to describe thermal energy, electrical energy, and radiant energy. The amount of power that's in a light source. And maybe you can kind of feel that yourself, like based on brightness of a light. If a light has more brightness, then it's probably more watts or more power. But again, that's kind of based on your visual spectrum of what you can see. And so you have power, and then you kind of divide that by the surface area that it's covering, and that's your intensity. So it's kind of to me, it kind of normalizes the power per square centimeter, like literally, so that's what, then that helps kind of normalize things so everyone's kind of speaking the same language. Because if you have a big device or a small device, you can still use that kind of intensity term and still kind of describe it. But so intensity, that's your first part of your dosing equation. And so, if we get that wrong, the rest of it is, what's the point? So, like you said, it's kind of a multivariable problem to solve for dosing, and because when we say dose, that's the energy. So there's two important things. There's power and there's energy, and in a scientific and engineering standpoint, they're two very different phenomena, right? Power is your energy per unit time, so it's your rate of energy, your speed at which energy is conveyed is power, and then energy is just energy, so that's the total kind of sum of it. So a lot of the times the dosing is, when you say dose for red light therapy or photobiomodulation, that's in energy, that's joules or joules per centimeter squared. So again, these are the metric system of joules and things like that. But again, it's a very simple unit of energy, and it's very closely related to watts, because 1 joule per second is a watt. So that's the really basic dosing. Is if you want to know, okay, I need 4 joules to get a therapeutic response, then you do your watts times your number of seconds, and that's joules. So very simple math. It's just a multiplication if you have everything else lined up. And there's some guidelines like WALT, W-A-L-T, the World Association for Laser Therapy. They've got some guidelines for dosing, but that's really more for lasers. And so we've been in kind of an uncharted territory with these red light panels, is that there's actually not a lot of studies on red light therapy panels specifically. So that's where there's a lot of room for interpretation. Companies can kind of say, oh, you engulf your whole body in a full body thing and do it for 10 or 20 minutes and something great will happen. I promise. So that's about as sophisticated as we can get right now without better measurements, without more studies, and really kind of being honest with what what the numbers mean. So hopefully, yeah, that's kind of the rough overview. So you got intensity, that's your power per square centimeter. That's what you feel when the light's hitting you, and then a certain amount of time, and then you've got your energy. That's your dose. So it's, again, if you're taking a pill, and a pill's 1,000 milligrams, and then you can decide, okay, am I taking 1 pill or 2 pills or 3 pills? You know, that's the thing. So you got 1,000 milligrams, and I'm going to take 3 pills. That's 3,000 milligrams. Same thing. If I've got 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, and I do it for 3 seconds, and then that's 300 joules or whatever. Or no, the conversion is different because you got to divide by 1,000. But anyway, that's the general. So it's not, if you're dosing like a pill, you use milligrams, and however many pills you take, you dose in photobiomodulation. It's intensity times your time. So it's not a kind of a crazy concept. Yeah, I don't know.
No, for sure. And yeah, and your website has a very nice calculator in there, so that as long as you can get the numbers, you can plug them in the calculator and then figure out your dose. And that's sometimes the big trick is like figuring out what is the right dose for what organ system. And you say on PubMed, there's probably at least last time I looked, there's over 4,000 publications on low-level light therapy and photobiomodulation. So figure out what organ system you want to treat, figure out what the dosage is, and then kind of reverse engineer it to figure out, well, how much time is it? And as you were saying, it's like the irradiance. I can tell patients it's kind of like, a fire hose versus, a drip of water. Like, how fast are those photons hitting you? Is it just dripping out, or is it blasting out? And then how long do you need to stay in front of it? Is it 5 seconds, or is it 5 hours? And then that kind of gives you an idea of things. And I know you kind of posted something, I don't know if we'll go too deep into it, but the Roscoe Brunson law of reciprocity. It's kind of like if you're cooking a turkey, you can't throw it in blast for 5 seconds and expect it to be done. But if you put it under a flashlight, it's not going to cook. So there has to be a certain time component and a certain intensity that you have to get. And I think that's where you kind of really lead the way, is that, at least on your devices, you spell it out directly. This is how these things are set up. You send it out to a professional third party. They analyze it, give you the actual numbers. And I think that's where you kind of are a little bit controversial in the photobiomodulation world, is that you actually use the correct meter. So could you talk a little bit about what one of the biggest myths of that there are in photobiomodulation, that is higher radiance is better. These panels are frequently marketed as 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, which be a lot of photons. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and there's a couple layers to unpack, because companies are getting more sophisticated with this deception. Is basically, a lot of companies were using, when they first started, these red light panel companies, they were retrofitting basically grow lights, and all the grow light manufacturers had a solar power meter to measure their panels, and they thought that was fine. Nobody had any engineering experience to validate a measurement system or check a measurement system. When an engineer designs something, the second step in the design process is to make sure your measurements are correct. And so they started using these solar power meters. I don't know, but and so these are designed for a very specific purpose. That's to measure sunlight. It's in the name. So what I found was that if people really wanted me to break it down, first off, all you have to do is measure with a solar power meter, and then have a professional measure it. It's not that expensive. I send them to a lab in Pennsylvania, and you'll see huge discrepancy. There's not much of a question. Then, if you really want to break it down, it's because they use kind of a photodiode sensor. It's a very common sensor that has kind of a responsivity curve that increases with the wavelength. So for something that's meant to measure full spectrum sunlight, and then all of a sudden you start to measure on the longer wavelengths, the reds and the near infrareds, you're going to, what I noticed, you're going to end up doubling or tripling the real world value when you try to measure with this. So you're measuring red and near infrared LEDs. It's going to measure falsely high because it's got a higher responsivity, and then you get a falsely high reading. But this has gone on and perpetuate through the industry for years and years. It's still going on now. Ari Witten wrote about it in his book, and he used this same model in his book. And people ask me, well, Andrew, you can't be right, because Ari Witten took a picture of solar power meters and he used them in his book, and everything in a book has to be correct all the time. And I was like, and I talked to Ari. He's a reasonable guy, and I said, hey, I laid it out. The measurements aren't correct. You got to get things, at least third party measured or measured with the right tools. And he's understanding of that, and he might be, updating his book in the future. So again, I was fighting against books and blogs and all these other companies using it and saying it's okay. And Andrew's the crazy one, or he's a liar, or whatever, because he's the only one talking about this. And maybe I dug up a couple other people in the past that have spoken out about it. There was an interview, it's behind a paywall, but someone interviewed Dr. Hamblin, and they asked him about solar power meters, which first off, it's embarrassing to even ask Dr. Hamblin if you should use solar power meters, and he said no right away. And he said you should use, a power meter or a thermopile or whatever. So you get these falsely high numbers. Then you start telling people, oh, you need 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 6 inches away from your panel. And the real reason why you have to be 6 inches away is because the panels are inherently high EMF. They have large magnetic fields from the drivers and from the fans. So that was an arbitrary distance to begin with. Again, most studies are using skin contact, and we can talk about that later. So they said you need 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, which we measured falsely high with one of these. You need this. Anything less than that, you won't get any effect. So don't buy anything else. And I'm basically talking about Juve at this point with their original marketing message. They said, throw out any other thing, all the Salumas that were before them, the PDLs, all these other companies that have FDA clearance and have real FDA approval. Your Omnilux and all these things that came before Juve and had real approvals. They said, throw all those out. We're the only ones that have really high intensity because we measure with a solar power meter, and we're great. So none of that tracks because they never delivered the intensity that they claimed in the first place. And then like you said, if you have any knowledge or expertise in red light therapy, 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared is a lot of intensity. It's a lot of power. Maybe it's okay if you have a very small laser. So a lot of the studies that Juve was referencing back in the day were laser studies. Is a very small, and so if you have a very small laser on your skin, your skin can manage that because it's a small spot size, and you got plenty of blood flow, and your blood flow thermoregulates things. So maybe with a laser, 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared is fine. And that's where they cherry picked all their studies to say you need 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So, so again, there's always, some context. But if you engulf your whole body in 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, for reference, sunlight is 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared across the entire spectrum that it emits. And, in the noontime, in the summer, if you lay it out in the sun, what do you feel? You feel pretty hot. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people will say, well, that's the far infrared, because far infrared resonates with your water molecules, and that's the heating wavelength. But it's wavelength and it's intensity dependent. So I showed on my YouTube channel over a year ago that I was able to burn my skin with a red 660 nanometer high intensity LED. I made a red mark right on my forearm, circular, because it's like, I didn't measure it properly, but I think it's like 300 milliwatts per centimeter squared. I held it there for over 30 seconds, past the pain point, and override it. And you can burn, I could burn my skin with 660 nanometer. And everyone says, oh, no, you can't burn yourself. It's non-thermal wavelengths. No, you can burn yourself because it's intensity dependent. So most of the studies, like Dr. Hamblin has a really good study called Infrared and Skin, Friend or Foe. You can Google search that. It's completely free to read. And he says if you want to avoid skin hyperthermia, so overheating your skin, you want to be less than 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So again, that's a very reasonable number, very reasonable intensity, and everyone's claiming to have doubled that with their false intensity claim. So again, if you had any knowledge of, first off, you should double check your measurement. As an engineer, you should not just trust to run random measurement. And second off, if you had knowledge and you said, well, this is double what Dr. Hamblin says would cause skin hyperthermia, you should start to question, like, well, should I put this thing on the market? And then past a certain point, at 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, I think 10 seconds of direct eye exposure will give you a cataracts or something. So if you stare at something that's incredibly high intensity, it's bad for your eyes, it's bad for your skin. So again, there hasn't been any logic or diligence applied to these intensity claims and the measurements and things like that. So that's where, the whole baselining of, do we want to understand in dosing, like you invited me for, we have to recalibrate not just our measurement devices, we have to recalibrate our brains, because everyone thinks you need 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared. You need to bring that down. You need to say, okay, a more recent study, very similar to Hamblin's study, said an ideal intensity for skin rejuvenation was 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared. And he kind of gave a range from 20 to 40 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So again, like you said, the Bunsen-Roscoe law of reciprocity, I think it's like the second or third law of photobiomodulation, that says, you've got some wiggle room, right? Mm-hmm. As long as you're in a reasonable range. I would say my range is more like 5 milliwatts up to, maybe 40 is the max of something that's really reasonable. If you want to go really low and slow versus something really fast and you see what you get. But this study really referenced, again, the solar spectrum, that component of red to near infrared that we're uniquely evolved to, optimize our bodies. That's usually like 30 to 40 milliwatts per centimeter squared. That component from red to near infrared, that's like the ideal intensity, because that's what we're used to from sunlight. So again, our skin's been very well attuned. So if you go 2 times that or 3 times that, you're going to run into problems. But so everyone has kind of this false sense of security and safety. Oh, I'm using a new platinum LED is like 150 milliwatts per centimeter squared. But oh, really? Okay, yeah. Let's see. Like, is that even a good idea? No. And again, if we measure it, I just put up a YouTube video where I did some quick measurements, and maybe they're mid 40s or 50s of milliwatts per centimeter squared. So again, we just have to recalibrate. And even that, I think that's pushing it, because you're mid 40s or 50s, and we're starting to hear more and more people on Facebook groups and different things that they say, hey, I'm getting redness, on my skin when I use this red light panel, and then they blame the near infrared because they say near infrared's a little bit more of a heating wavelength, but it's really not that much. But then they blame near infrared's the problem, so they turn off the near infrared, and then you have less. Then you just cut off half the power, and now you're in a safer space to use your product, because you just turn off half your LEDs. So it's So again, you're very important to at least re-baseline, start telling people, hey, platinum LED or whoever it is, say, hey, can you just get third-party testing or get better measurements and throw out that solar power meter and let the customers decide what they want to do, and educate them and treat them like adults that can do their own math and do their own things. So again, it shouldn't be a crazy concept. So yeah, hopefully. And so you can use, I've got a really budget laser power meter. Mm-hmm. It's called Sanwa. The US distributor is called Spur Scientific or Spur Direct, SPER. So you can get one of these, and then you kind of have to manually adjust for the wavelength, because it is using the same silicone photodiode, but now it's calibrated and you can adjust for the wavelength for that sensitivity curve. So it's a very, like I said, it's a very common diode. You can get it from, there's a Thor Labs, which sells, you know, different measurement tools. And then there's Ophir. I just bought an Ophir thermopile power meter. And so that the nice thing about a thermopile power meter is that it's got like basically a black sensor. So it's spectrally flat. So you don't have to compensate for wavelength that much. And so it's a spectrally flat. And that's helpful for me because a lot of panels have like 3 or 4 wavelengths, and sometimes 5 wavelengths. And so it's nice to have that spectrally flat measurement because it doesn't get disrupted by different wavelengths. And then there's a spectroradiometer, which kind of, you know, it's kind of a similar to a spectrometer, except it's uniquely calibrated to give you the intensity for every single wavelength. And that's what I've been using ever since I started with my third-party lab. They've always used a spectroradiometer. And so you can really analyze every nanometer of that spectrum. I've tried to kind of explain that on my blog, but I don't think anyone cares about that much. But like you can really go, because there's an LED distribution, and sometimes the distribution's wider or more narrow. So, but you know, I mean, we could get really sophisticated with it, but we first have to come to the realization of what's the real intensity of these things in the first place, and then we can get really sophisticated with how do you dose different people, different skin types, different genders. Should you use contact, skin contact or non-contact? Different parts of the body might have different penetration. So like the inside of my arm, you can see the veins, and that will have better penetration. The other side of my arm has more melanin and has thicker skin. So, you know, you get less penetration. So, you know, different parts of the body have different penetration profiles and different dosing profiles. So you can get really sophisticated. It's like you said, it's a multivariable thing, which is what I was trained to analyze as an engineer. It's awesome. But, you know, what's the point if everyone thinks they've got 150 milliwatts per centimeter squared? It's like, okay, well, we're living in fantasy land, so just blast yourself with your light and hope for the best. So, you know, I mean, that's the dosing for most other companies, which, you know, I get apparently has worked for, you know, 4 or 5 years now. So blast your whole body and you feel great afterwards. You get this burst of energy. If it is a high intensity panel, you do feel warmth, even though photobiomodulation by definition is not a thermal process. If you want a heat lamp, then just buy a heat lamp. But, you know, you can get some kind of instant gratification with like high powered LED panels. But, you know, I mean, but we're still missing the point, you know, I don't know. And then I bought this Hopo color. I got to stop buying these things. So it's the Hopo color. I just got it. And this is the same one that Alex Fergus uses for his reviews, because I really wanted to check it out because I think his numbers are a little too high too. So I'm like really losing it. But this one, and I emailed Hopo Color and had them customize. I said, you need to make sure it's calibrated for the range 600 to 900 nanometers, and it can handle this high intensity. Because sometimes companies make these spectrometers and they're only made to measure generic light bulbs. They're not made for high intensity use, or they're not made for longer wavelengths. So I had them make sure they really check the calibration. And so now mine reads differently than because I compare it to Alex's measurements. I'm like, oh, now like they're just completely different. So you can't even trust. But I think it's more accurate because it looks closer to my Ophir thermopile. So anyway, so I'm gonna have fun with that pretty soon with doing some reviews. But yeah, so there's different options, and I don't want to tell people, you know, what's the best option and how to measure things. Like, again, we can have some open discussion about this, but first we got to throw away the solar power meters. So that, I mean, and everyone's trying to jump kind of jump to the next step and distract everyone and say, oh, well, we got to standardize. We all have to use the same lab, or we have to all use the same measurement tool, or, you know, but these are discussions we should have after we just throw away the solar power meters. So yeah, that's kind of the rundown on different measurement tools, and why it's kind of just a lot of fallacies of like, okay, we never delivered 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared in the first place, and you never needed it. That's the more important thing. You never needed it. So you need something closer. Maybe 30 would be a really ideal range if you want to push it to 40. Sometimes I'm on the lower end. The other aspect of dosing, and there's a really good guideline on Walt's website, like I said, the World Association for Laser Technology, WALT, or therapy, is they specify, does a study use skin contact or non-contact treatment? So again, that's how you dose it. So it's not just the energy like we talked about, not just the intensity and the time, but what's the context of that dose? Did you use skin contact? Because again, light reflects off your skin. If I've got my light, there's a lot of light reflecting off my skin. But then if I smush it against my skin, it's kind of trapped, and it has to kind of penetrate the skin a little deeper. But if I'm back here, you see all the reflection, like it's all bouncing off my face. And I've done a lot of investigations about 60% of red and near infrared light can bounce off the skin. There's been a bunch of studies about this. So they've really characterized it. It's not really much of a mystery to say, okay, you're going to have significant reflection losses. Again, it's not a terrible thing. I'm not saying, a panel that you stand six inches away from is not effective. I'm just saying it's less effective than you thought, and it's less efficient than everyone thought. So maybe, I try to balance things. So if you can use a little bit lower intensity, you don't need the fans, you can make the power driver external. And that's what I've been trying to do to really reduce the EMFs. And then it's safer for you to use it closer to your skin because you're not exposing yourself to EMFs. So that's the other, there's more to dosing than just that. So are you using skin contact or not? And and just, again, companies just being honest about the drawbacks of skin reflection losses. And again, maybe, it's kind of been a funny thing of maybe you just use your panel a little bit longer and that offsets it. And that plays a big role in penetration as well, because, if a lot of light is bouncing off your skin, and that kind of how the penetration profile changes if you're doing skin contact or non-contact. And then, are you really reaching that target tissue that you're trying to dose? So unless you're really going for a superficial systemic kind of dose, you probably want skin contact to really, if you want that penetration too. And everyone emails me like, can I penetrate my brain? Can I penetrate my gut? Can I penetrate my bones? The simple answer is not really. You can't really reach the brain or the gut very well unless you've got really a high-powered concentrated laser, and then you risk burning the skin. And then the studies kind of get around that by pulsing the laser. So pulsing also is kind of a myth because it turns on and off your light, which is fine. And it gives your skin a little bit of time, that even if it's a microsecond or whatever, it can be 10 hertz or 40 hertz or hundreds of hertz. It gives your skin that little bit of time to cool off. And then, but you get those larger, stronger pulses. But you're not doing this with an LED usually. And you're not doing this with a panel that's non-contact. So again, if Juve's adding their pulsing features to their latest generation panels, and they're saying, oh, you get better penetration and better recovery with it. I'm like, there's no science for it. It's just not even like a real statement. And the one or two studies they did reference, kind of contradicts. If you just read, if you read it, just kind of contradicts it, because when you turn off your LED bulb, 10 times a second, you're just reducing your dose. You're not actually improving much of anything. So pulsing is good. Again, it's all contextual. Pulsing is good if you're trying to reduce your your heat response, the thermal response, which generally isn't a problem with LED panels. So why would you do it? But there's also brainwave entrainment, which I do. I do like the binaural beats sometimes. But you can kind of entrain your brain either through flashing lights through your eyes, or even if you can kind of pulse it a little bit, will get to your brain, and your brain waves kind of entrain to frequencies pretty well. So if you're watching TV and the TV flickers at 120 hertz, they've studied this. Your brain's entraining to the flashing and the flickering of the TV. This was with more of the older style CRT TVs. But your brain waves entrain with your music or with lights in your eyes or whatever. So if we wanted to produce alpha, which is a desirable state, you do 10 hertz. If you want gamma, that's 40 hertz. So you'll see some companies doing that. So that's not really a dosing thing. It's more like maybe your brainwave entrainment, or maybe there's some subcellular mechanisms that aren't entirely explained yet, that maybe your cells, like certain, there's certain, voltage gates that kind of you can switch on and off. So maybe there's some mechanisms that if you find the right frequency, you can modulate it in a way that you want it to. But that's so much more sophisticated than the science really knows right now. But so the number one reason of using pulsing is to manage your thermal load on your skin. So, we're going to see a lot more of that. I heard a couple other companies are going to come out. A couple of the big companies, like I shouldn't say, but a couple other companies are coming out with pulsing in their panels. And so now, again, it's going to be another myth that I have to keep busting of like, why would you do that? And then again, are you going to measure pulsing with this thing? Or how are you going to do that? Because this thing can't keep up. So what's the peak, and what's the, you can characterize that pulsing if you want to know the dose. And like on Juve's website, they don't tell you what's the dose in pulse mode versus the dose in non-pulse mode. It's different. So why would you sell a product and you don't characterize all your features? Why would you not measure it? Why would you not tell your customers what they're being exposed to? So so that's my bit on pulsing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had some experience in pulsing with some brain photobiomodulation, and the 10 and 40 hertz seem to be the ones that are most studied. And I took a training course with Thor, and they basically said that if you start pulsing over 100 hertz, it's basically continuous. And their big point was too is that it was helping mostly with the thermal load. But I think it was somebody had a question about it. I was a little bit confused about the difference between laser and LEDs for photobiomodulation. The lasers. The short answer is, they were studied first because they were invented first, and then later the LEDs were invented and shown that at least they're generally fairly equivalent for certain things. But he was mentioning earlier is that most studies on laser are direct skin contact. The LEDs, depending on how they're made, especially with the panels, you're not usually going to be having skin contact with those. And a lot of that light is bouncing off of you. So I learned the acronym RAT. So is it reflected? Is it absorbed? Is it transmitted? And, just like an X-ray that goes through you, or does it scatter? Does the wavelengths come in and kind of bounce around, and then maybe they interact with something, or maybe they shoot out? So typically, skin contact with lasers just delivers the dose a little bit more targeted. But I mean, the one good thing is with most of these panels is it's actually fairly hard to, quote, hurt yourself with these panels. It's just that, are you getting the true dose that you suspect you're getting? And like I said, you know, I'm pretty jealous of all your toys, you know, the monitors. I mean, I definitely am somebody who's been, you know, test don't guess type of person. And that's probably one of my next purchases is to get one of these meters, and then I can test the different panels I have. And because like you said, you know, there's this myth that 6 inches is magical and that's the right, you know, way you should be standing by your panel. But if you have one of these meters, you can measure, okay, well, I'm at, you know, 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 12 inches away from this particular panel. Okay, that's how much I want in me for 10 minutes. And then that's how you actually biohack this with each panel is you have a meter, figure out the irradiance, and then find out what, you know, dose you want from some kind of article, and then that tells you how long you should stand in front of it. But you know, your information has been gold for my audience, and I definitely appreciate it. You know, what other big myths have you been seeing out there lately in the photobiomodulation world?
Yeah, I think I saw that question. Also, the laser versus LED. So yeah, laser is typically like a very small kind of point. It's more concentrated. So it's like you said, it's contextually like kind of very different from a LED, which is more of a, you know, usually more of a divergent light source. So it's non-coherent light as opposed to, you know, laser is coherent light, and it's a you know, laser is a truly single wavelength. So if you have a, you know, 650 wavelength laser, it's mostly just that one wavelength, where LEDs have a little bit more of a spectrum to it, like plus or minus 15 nanometers. You know, so you get a little bit like, I don't know, broader spectrum from an LED. And again, do those, you know, and then lasers, like I saw a bunch of studies about the speckle in a laser and all these like polarization kind of phenomenon, and if that like really makes a difference, you know, or is it just down to like kind of if you can make equivalent from a laser and an LED, and again, it's not always easy to do, you can get similar benefits and similar results. That's what a couple of Hamblin's more recent articles basically say. If you can really make the LED equivalent to the laser or try to normalize that, then, you know, you can get very similar results. And like you said, the lasers were just kind of invented first, and the LEDs took longer to make them higher powered and make them more useful like they are today. And now LEDs are much safer than lasers because, like I said, they're divergent, they're non-coherent. You can't harm your eyes, you can't harm your skin so much, you know, unless you can't really hurt yourself with an LED panel, unless you like really try. I don't know, but you know, so you really, you know, and that's the nice thing about LED red light therapy is that there's really not many risks. There's no issues. You know, again, as long as you're not kind of irresponsible with it, and as long as the manufacturers aren't irresponsible with trying to, you know, they keep, you know, what we're seeing is with Alex Fergus's latest review, he's done some of the best reviews on the marketplace for testing each panel and trying to do his best to measure it properly and say, okay, but he always ranks the highest power as the top. So that's only going to incentivize companies to keep increasing their intensity. And at some point, and I think we're already at that line of like, if we increase intensity anymore in these full body panels, then you're going to start to see more skin issues and more complaints about, oh, my skin's getting red, or oh, I'm getting you know, pigmentation issues. You know, a lot of people are starting to say it. They have pigmentation issues and they blame the near infrared. So it's that competition for keep on increasing the intensity. We're going down the wrong path, and I'm surprised that, you know, eventually the FDA will catch up to one of these companies because they're, you know, delivering unprecedented amount of powers, and they're being, you know, kind of irresponsible with that. So, you know, that's what we got to keep an eye on is like at some point you're going to hit a wall, and that's going to be like too much intensity, too much power. And that's going to be a problem. So, you know, again, it's that intensity thing is one of the biggest problems. You know, again, it's important to consider like you don't always need a giant panel. I remind people that all the time. You can use smaller panels, like some of my popular ones are just 1 foot by 1 foot squares. That makes it really convenient. It makes it easy to use, to move around the house if you want to use it on a couch or whatever, as opposed to a big panel you got to hang on a door or a wall, and you have to go out of your way to the panel, as opposed to, oh, why can't I just use my panel while I sit on the couch or sit on, sit in the bed just before bed. So for me, it's about convenience, making, just having it, somewhere convenient that you don't have to strip down naked and go to some random room where your panel's hanging. I like to have the convenience, and, you can do a lot with systemic results. Like I said, you don't necessarily need to douse your whole body, or you don't need to directly, zap your brain. You can get systemic benefits just from using it, wherever you need to use it. Some of the best places for systemic results are the forehead, because the forehead is very close to the skull. And then, if your target bones like the forehead, the tibia is very interesting, your shin bone, and then your sternum. So anywhere you've got bones that are close to the surface, if you can stimulate those, it produces stem cells. It helps promote stem cell production, which is huge. And they've studied this for it helps with your heart and it helps with your brain. So you can target your tibia and help your brain. So that's again, if we're talking about dosing, it's well, I can dose my tibia and heal my brain. It's kind of a mind-blowing concept to say, oh, we're trying to help. It's something that helps the whole body. It's like if you got scurvy and your gums are bleeding and you're tired and you're fatigued and all that, you take vitamin C and it's like a miracle. That's like red light therapy. If you've not been using red light therapy, you're not getting out in the sun, and you start using it and you're like, wow, this is really, giving me something I've been missing out on, we've been deficient in. So there's really, a lot of potential benefits. Another one is targeting the gut and getting the remote photobiomodulation. And I think I just saw a pretty new study I wanted to post about. It was they measured a shift from good bacteria, from bad bacteria to good bacteria. And it was for Parkinson's patients too. So they were targeting the gut. And again, the gut has to do with inflammation and with your brain. And it was helping with Parkinson's patients. So it's a really, again, when we talk about it's where do you dose, and do you need to zap your brain, or do you target your gut, or do you target your shins or your forehead? And then I've got a nice head of hair. Should I wear a ball, like a V light, or some of the head units, or is that going to block all the light? And so sometimes you're like, well, a V light's not very practical for me, because should I shave my head for it? So sometimes it's kind of well, your real estate, you got plenty of real estate in the forehead, maybe the lower part of the neck. So yeah. So what else is a myth? Any questions that came in earlier?
Somebody just popped up with any info on doing this while pregnant, or targeting gut. Gut while pregnant. Yeah, this is one of those ones where it's kind of the precautionary principle. People go outside, in the sunlight, who are pregnant and you're getting full spectrum wavelengths onto their abdomen and uterus. But, if you're standing next to these panels and you don't know the EMFs coming off of it, it's one of those things that's probably not best to direct it straight towards your abdomen in that case.
Yeah, and I did a pretty comprehensive blog on contraindications. Generally they say don't aim it at the gut, even though they contradicted themselves in the study, because they said the wavelengths don't penetrate to the baby anyway. So it's kind of there's really no safety issue that's ever been tested for pregnancy, but they just say, hey, don't aim it at the abdomen. I think Thor Photomedicine, they give some guidelines. Hey, if you got back pain while you're pregnant, you can target your back. That's perfectly fine. So you can kind of target other places to help kind of relieve yourself. And again, you still get systemic benefits no matter where you do it. So you don't have to be like, oh, I want to blast my baby. You can turn him into a Superman. You can just do your back or do your shins or do whatever. And trust, like you said, if you know if something's a contraindication, if you can go outside in sunlight for 20 minutes, you can probably be okay with a red light therapy. That's generally the thing. If you can, so sometimes people ask about children or pregnancy, and it's like, do you let your kids outside in the sun? Which, if they're not used to it, some kids will be like, wow, that's too bright. So it's fine, and you got to work your way up to it. So, that's one of the big things is helping people. If you're not used to it, I think it's very rare, but just to let people say, okay, start with 5 minutes and then build your way, 5 minutes for every day for a week, and then build it up to 10 minutes and build it up to 20 minutes if you're really cautious or you're not sure. So, again, so there's always ways you can try to phase it in if you're not sure about different things. You'll see if you have an adverse response, you'll see it. One person asked that about recovering from hernia surgery. Again, I think you're the doctor here.
Yeah, I mean, this
why not?
This would be the best, causes to use, photobiomodulation would be to heal up from the surgery. I mean, you're putting those healing wavelengths directly into the wound. The collagen is going to heal better. It's going to lower inflammation. It's going to bring blood flow to that territory to help decrease the swelling. So, big fan for using photobiomodulation, after surgery. But now this is where it gets complicated. I can't treat you one-on-one over the internet like this. And this is where it's hard to say, like, well, should it be 10 minutes at 6 inches? I can't tell you because I don't know what device you have. That's the biggest challenge with it. But as a global rule, it's generally going to be pretty useful. And somebody had a question about, can you use these like I think it's like probably inside a sauna, like having near infrared as well.
Yeah.
As long as your device doesn't overheat with it. I've seen some people kind of biohack their units like that, but I don't personally do them both at the same time, but I don't have a problem with people doing it if they don't overheat their devices.
Yeah. That's the tricky part is because most devices aren't rated for the heat or especially for too much humidity. So I usually, tell people don't bring the panels inside the sauna. If you really want, you can kind of shine it through the window of the sauna. Maybe some of my floodlight products, they can tolerate more heat and they're actually water resistant. So maybe some of those can go in. But I'm just like, just enjoy the sauna. You don't have to like biohack it, just like chill out and enjoy the sauna and do red light there, like, I got to do all these things together. I'm gonna do like a charcoal mask and do this and that and gua sha and skin brushing and all these things. And it's like just chill, you can kind of chill and space things out and do what you need to do. There was a question about, and the wound healing thing for NASA was studying that for wound healing. That was one of the big ones. That's definitely one of the biggest things that, as like just having red light therapy as like your first aid kit, it's just to have it there, even if you're generally in good health. If you bump your elbow or you hurt yourself or you pull your back or you've got some sort of wound and you just want to help alleviate that and speed up that healing process, and surgery is always a question. Like you said, there's some nuance to it. I think the only contraindication is like, don't treat a wound that's open, that's gushing blood, because obviously you increase the circulation to it and you'd cause more. But that's, that wouldn't be a common thing. But generally the wound healing is huge. Somebody asked about red light for hair loss. Most of the studies I see are, in the red wavelengths. I'm not sure why, if there's any preference for red. I don't see why you can't also use near infrared. So red would be, I think some of the laser studies were using 650, but you could also use 660, and it's close enough. And then near, again, I don't see any issue with near infrared. Some of the laser, hair caps that they used. Yeah. They did it like every other day for like 20 or 30 minutes. Doesn't seem like high intensity because some reason there might be kind of you're worried more about that biphasic dose response. Well, we can talk about that. I forgot to talk about biphasic dose response. Is that, if your hair follicles are really sensitive and you overdose it, then you create an inhibitory response, which basically kind of stops that healing response. So there's kind of 2 or 3 responses of red light therapy. One is no response. So that means you did way too little. You did very, very low intensity for a very, very low amount of time. So, that, don't worry about that. So then you have stimulatory, which, stimulates the cells. And then if you dose it even more, then you get inhibitory. And inhibitory is not always a bad thing because you can use that to blunt pain. Yeah, to reduce the pain. So you could, I think James Carroll from Thor Medicine, he said in an interview or something that he had like a tooth extraction and he only used lasers to numb the pain.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So so that's the inhibitory dose. Again, you're probably not going to see that much with LEDs. You're going to get that more with lasers and much higher doses. But that's something, if you have a sensitive part of the body, like your hair follicles, maybe they space it out because some of that dose also stays in your body for 24 to 48 hours. So spacing out your dose is also part of the dosing protocol. Do you do it once a day, or do you do it every other day, or do it a couple times a week or a couple times a month? Those, again, are nuances of dosing that all play an important role, because you don't want to overdose, and we know it stays in the skin, so you get what's called a cumulative dose. So I dose it one day, the next day, and it can stay in your cells and keep rising, and then eventually you'll cross that inhibitory curve, and you won't get the hair benefits or whatever benefits you were hoping for. And again, I tell people it's not a magic bullet. Red light therapy can certainly help with the hair, but also look at your stress or your diet or your sleep and your hormones and all these things. So sometimes I get emails of like, oh, my stress is a wreck and all this stuff, but can your red light therapy cure my hair loss? I'm like, well, you just answered your own you just answered your own question. You need to stop the stress, and the red light therapy can't undo that. So it can help, but make sure you are tackling the root causes too, especially with something like hair loss. It's a little bit more nuanced. So the biphasic dose response is really important, to say, okay, again, not just heating your skin, which we talked about a lot, but at some point it's counterproductive to do too much dose. Oh, I'm going to stand in front of this for an hour and I'll get some better benefit. The manufacturer told me to only do 10 minutes, but I'm going to do an hour. It's like if you prescribe a pill to somebody and you say, hey, take this antibiotic, take 1 pill a day for 7 days, and the person goes home and they're like, that's stupid, doctor. I'm going to take the whole bottle in 1 day and just cure myself. That's not how dosing works in any reality for vitamins, minerals, drugs. You got to dose it consistently through a course. So again, there's importance to just take your time. Sometimes less is more is important saying to keep in people's head of like, okay, we don't have to go overboard. Not too much power, not too much time. Give it, if you're looking for hair benefits or skin benefits or something's a little bit more subtle, you got to give it more time. Take good before pictures and after pictures, and really look at it a couple months later and see how you're doing. And if you're not getting the results you want, you're experimenting with yourself. We don't have the magic dosing protocol for you. So you can say, okay, was I doing too much or was I doing too little? And adjust your protocol from there. So check in with yourself and say, okay, I did this for 3 weeks or a month. How am I feeling? How am I doing? Is my recovery better? Is, whatever you're working on. And then say, okay, maybe I should adjust, and then if we're still talking about dosing, it's the time of day is usually a big question, right? So there was a really crazy study about red light therapy for the eyes, of improving eyesight, and they found specifically that the red light therapy treated in the morning was much more effective than doing it in the afternoon. So maybe the eyes are a little bit more sensitive in the morning, or maybe it's kind of part of that circadian clock. Generally most of the studies don't really take note of like, were they doing it in the morning or were they doing it in the evening? So again, it's still kind of a gray area. But we know, you and I are both into our circadian hacking with blue blockers and using red lights at night and getting bright light during the day, sunlight ideally. So again, you can use red light therapy along those circadian rhythm guidelines to say, oh, I'm going to use my bright red light panel in my eyes in the morning, and that really feels great. And then maybe avoid blasting my eyes at night, maybe just use more gentle ambient lights at night, more still red because you want to avoid blue. And maybe just treat your torso or your body, because that can help stimulate melatonin production in your cells. And so, the few little tweaks like that can help you. Some people say, oh, I did my red light panel at night in the face and I couldn't fall asleep. And I'm like, well, try doing that in the morning and then see, or try, treating somewhere other than, usually it's the face or the head that will really trigger you to stay up and lose some sleep. But some people it goes the other way and they really love it at night. So, so the time of day, how often you do it, can you do it multiple times a day? Yes, and yes and no. You don't necessarily need to. I don't want people to waste time. And some people, they'll get one of my smaller lights and then they'll say, oh, I need to do my whole body, so I'm going to do 10 minutes, 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 and so again, don't worry about it. You get systemic benefits. Take your time, do it, once a day, at most twice a day, and kind of spread it out and be chill. So yeah.
And that's what I tell people with those panels, if you don't have a full size panel, that's fine. Spot weld, whatever hurts. And then, do the systemic stuff. Yeah, I'm a big fan of sternum treatment or the tibia treatment. I mean, there's a lot of interesting trials that are in Israel that, help treat cardiac patients, actively having a heart attack. And they was using lasers, 8-10 nanometers for 60 seconds during the, the myocardial infarction getting repaired in the cath lab. And those people had smaller heart attacks. At 9 months, they had the same heart function, so it didn't have long-term effects, but a certain blood marker was half than the people who weren't treated, because it provided energy to the stem cells that went to go fix the damaged heart tissue at that point. So treat your chest, treat your tibia, and treat whatever hurts, and move on with your day. You don't have to live on this thing. I just call it a supplement. That helps kind of with your kind of time of day thing. It's like, if the sun's up, you can use this thing. If the sun's down, well, be your own biohacker. Does it affect your sleep? Don't use it after the sunset. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Right. And, unfortunately, sometimes you just, you learn things the hard way and you try it out and you say, okay, that, it didn't work at night. And I usually do my chest at night, maybe my lower back at night. And then during the day, I'm doing either red lights or other bright lights, more for my face and for the eyes. But usually it's not a big problem. I think even Dr. Hamblin says sometimes he'll use, just near-infrared lights on his forehead. He'll use those security camera lights that are 850 nanometers, and he'll just use them on the forehead. And he says it helps him sleep. So, I've seen a bunch of YouTube videos actually pretty recently of saying near-infrared helps produce the melatonin, like intracellular melatonin, which again is really crucial for sleep. So yeah, so I think it's like that's, I think that's a huge component, again, because we know maybe we're not getting as much dose as everyone thought. Sometimes, you know, one of my theories is that, well, maybe you're just getting that really bright light and it's just energizing you, and it's more of a systemic thing. It's not penetrating, and you know, you're getting that bright lights for your eyes and your body, and it's more of that kind of bright light therapy than we might think. So some of that mood boosting and energizing is really just our eyes saying, "Oh wow, lots of light right now, so I'm going to be happy and be energized." So, you know, sometimes it's like you get all these benefits, and it's not just the photobiomodulation cellular benefits. It's also bright light therapy and color therapy and all these extra things, circadian, you know, entrainment. So, you know, so you can get it however you can, you know, like I said, it's just a biohacking thing. You know, it's always been that way of, you know, and that's why, again, it's like the companies will try to say, oh, we have all these great studies, but they're just ripped out of context, and they're not really relevant to the product they're selling you. So it's like really important, each person, even if a company says, oh, you know, just follow this protocol, or you know, here's a laundry list of benefits, you know, you still have to like figure it out yourself to say, how are you going to make it work for your individual body? So like I said, there's all these other factors that are important. So yeah.
All right. Well, I know we're you know, a little bit over an hour, which is cool. I, you know, very much appreciate your expertise tonight. This is definitely going to help people,
Yep.
you know, figure out how to, you know, dose themselves more appropriately with, you know, a panel, and, you know, how to actually pick a panel that works for them. But wanted to give people an opportunity to know, you know, where to find you, and, you know, what are you know, working on with GimbaRed?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've got, you know, some of my panels have been around for a few years, like my GimbaRed Groove and GimbaRed Rex. Those are just simple square panels, 3 or 4 wavelengths, just lightweight, low EMF, no fans, no noise. You know, the simple, you know, just a really simple design that have kind of stood the test of time, and you know, have worked really well for people. And then I've got some newer panels, like what I call the GimbaRed Beacon panel, and I just released a GimbaRed Vector panel. Both of those have 4 wavelengths too, and they've got an external power supply, and they've got no fans, so they're very low EMF. Even though they're plugged into the wall, they're extremely low EMF. I've got a YouTube video showing the EMF measurements. So again, very versatile products, because you can use them with skin contact, or you can use them from a distance away. I've got a few body panels that are, you know, kind of sitting in the ports, you know, sitting out in the ocean. So we're waiting on restock for a lot of products right now. Probably just hanging out in the ocean, having a good time. So we're waiting just patiently on that. I've got a bunch of night lights, reading lights, book lights. Again, more for the circadian rhythm aspect. You don't necessarily get photobiomodulation from it, because, you know, I don't want to confuse people that a red light therapy company is selling night lights. It's not some wink wink, oh, you get, you know, red light therapy benefits from a night light. They're truly just night lights. And again, if you can replace your nighttime lighting with red lights, or at least eliminate the blue light, then that can help you, you know, with your natural melatonin production, help you with sleep. And again, sleep is like the most critical part. So if you're using red light therapy, or if you're using some of my night lights, and you improve your sleep, then every part of your existence gets better, you know, if you can improve sleep. So it's such a huge thing. And again, a lot of my products I developed out of necessity, because I was traveling a lot in Europe, and I was traveling in China, and didn't really have control over, you know, the light bulbs in the hotels and the apartment, and so all I had were my strip lights and my reading lights and maybe a small panel, and and I just had to work with what I had. So a lot of these came just out of necessity, and I kind of pioneered some of these red light book lights and desk lights. And I was always surprised because there were low blue, like amber book lights, and there were low blue, all these low blue companies, but none of them went fully red until I started doing red light. Anyway, so it's just I see a gap in the market, and I just kind of try to fill it. Someone did ask about, I've got a cyan light, which is it's a wavelength 505 nanometers that's right between blue and green, so you get cyan or teal. So it's a cyan light, and it's more for bright light therapy. Like I said, you need those bright lights. So if you can sometimes you can just use a red light panel if you got it, or sometimes the studies prefer more like a bluish light or a greenish light, because that helps really stimulate those bright light receptors and shuts off your melatonin production. So you do that in the morning, shuts off your melatonin production. So you don't want melatonin during the day because you want to be alert and running around and doing your thing. So that's why I made the cyan lights, just to get a bright light therapy product out there that has a really good wavelength and is, again, third-party measured to give you the right amount of lux, because that's a brightness. So lux is kind of the analog to intensity, except it's brightness that your eyes perceive. So, for example, you can't see near infrared. So near infrared is always 0 lux, even though you can have high intensity near infrared, but it's 0 lux because you can't see it. But anyway, so there's a spectral kind of sensitivity curve. So I got a cyan light, and then someone also asked about my infrared T-shirts, which again, I think I'm a little bit ahead of my time with the infrared T-shirts, but there's some studies on that. You could just go on PubMed, look at far infrared textiles, far infrared clothing, and basically it takes your own body warmth, and it gets absorbed into some bioceramics that are embedded into the cloth itself. Usually it's like a polymer cloth, so you can impregnate the cloth with the ceramic particles, and so it doesn't wash away. So it's like like a nylon type. It's polyimide, so it's a nylon type cloth, and it re-emits that heat back to you as far infrared. So it's really good for stimulating kind of circulation. The company that makes it for me is in Italy, and so they do a lot of like skincare benefits, like anti kind of cellulite kind of stuff. But I just make it as a T-shirt just because I thought it'd be really convenient. You can wear it as an undershirt, you can wear it to bed, and it covers a big part of your torso. So again, it's a very subtle technology because it's there's no electricity. It's not pumping any photons at you. It's just kind of help recycling some of your body heat as far infrared. There are some, again, with another brand, if you look up Celliant, they develop their own fibers, and they're using them as socks for diabetics to help produce circulation for their feet. So there's a lot of potential there. And again, it's like something that's, a very passive kind of thing. You just wear it, you get a little bit extra far infrared. It feels great, feels a little bit warmer. So it's all kind of aligned with that. But I think I'm still a little bit early to the market with this concept because the only other company that's done it is actually Under Armour made their own far infrared clothing, and I think they had some football star trying to promote it. But again, I don't think that really has taken off with the mainstream, but I think, like all these things like red light therapy and photobiomodulation and all these, frequency-based therapies, like we're starting to get more and more traction. Every year I get more and more traffic to my website. I get more interest, more people. So, it's becoming more and more mainstream. So sometimes I do kind of weird products like the far infrared shirts or cyan lights, just to help keep people say, hey, there's all these alternatives out there And once you're into red light therapy and you felt how good that is, it's like a gateway drug to like, should I get a spurty, vitamin D lamp? Should I get, bright light therapy? Should I get a far infrared sauna, or should I use heat lamps, and so you start to like, oh man, like this light thing is really the real deal. And so you can start with a simple, cheap, hopefully, affordable red light therapy product. And then it really spirals into, my whole life is just red light therapy, and everything I do is just red light products and different lighting products. So it can really just take over your whole life. I've found.
Yeah, well, I very much appreciate it. This has been wonderful. This is Andrew Latour from Kimber Red. I'll share this on my story in a little bit. This will be on my IGTV, and it'll take me a day or so to download it. I'll put it up on my YouTube channel as well, and tag you there. But thank you very much for your attention tonight. Everybody who's watching, great questions. And if you have any other questions about photobiomodulation, just shoot me some comments. If I can't answer it, I'll ask Andrew to help me out. So,
yeah.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Well, have a great evening, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Thanks for having me.